Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is my December wrap-up. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books. And today I'm going to be taking you through all of the books that I read in December 2022. It's my final wrap up of 2022 and it will also be my final update on the Giant TBR for 2022. That will be at the end of the video and we will see what number I am starting the year with on the Giant Bookshelf. First of all, before we go into all of the comings and goings on the Giant TBR, in December I read 16 books, which was pretty good, and that amounted to around about 4,577 pages according to Storygraph. Among those books was 4 audiobooks, 2 ebooks, which is unusual for me, 2 library books, 5 books from the Giant TBR, 1 book from within a collection, and 2 books were books that I had hauled within the month of December. As always, for my wrap-ups, I'm going to take you through roughly in order from least favourite to most favourite, but I will say that in December I found that all of my books were pretty of a level. I didn't really have a massively standout favourite book in December, neither did I read any really bad books, so I would say everything this time was good and above, but I didn't really have a favourite, although I will obviously get to the ones that were more my favourites towards the end. A lot of these books have been wrapped up elsewhere because I did do a mid-month wrap-up to wrap up Christie's Missing Readathon, and December was definitely a month of 2 halves. I felt like I concentrated really hard on the Christie's Missing Readathon from the 3rd to the 14th of December, and then after that my reading really did tail off quite a bit, and then after Christmas I think my reading picked back up, but I was very much sort of mood reading from various things and not necessarily wanting to finish off the books that I had started this year. There are 2 books that I started and did not finish in 2022 that I will probably either restart in 2023 or carry on and finish them, and one of those was one of the Killer Reads Thriller Month book club books, and that was Dead Letters by Kate Dolan Leach. I sort of technically started this in November and I thought I would finish it off at the end of the month, but then realised I'd only actually read 28 pages and I just didn't feel like I had time, so I didn't read it. That is one library book that I still have out that I need to get on with. And the other book causes me a bit of a problem because when I hauled this book, I had started reading it before the end of the month and I didn't add it to my Giant TBR, which is very unusual for me because the way the Giant TBR normally works is if I haul any books within the month, if I read them then within that calendar month, I don't add them to the Giant TBR, but if I don't read them, I add them to the Giant TBR at the end of the month. So the books are only sort of tallied up at the end of every month in the wrap-up. When I tallied up that month, I didn't add this one because I was already halfway through it and I thought I would finish it no problem in the next month. As it happened in the next month, I actually put the book down and I picked this back up in December to try to finish it off and I just couldn't do it. I was not that interested, I was not really enjoying it. So it's not a DNF. I'm definitely going to keep this book because it was a really great charity shop find, and at some point I will read all of it, but I'll probably reset things with this book and either start again or I will try and chip away at it in 2023. And that was The Floating Admiral by members of the Detection Club, including Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers and G.K. Chesterton. Now, on paper this sounds like a great idea. Each chapter is written by a different mystery writer and they had to carry on from where the last person left off, and each person had to have a sort of solution in mind to the mystery. The problem is, in practice, some of the chapters are really great. It did tail off quite a lot. So I'm about halfway through this and I'm going to temporarily abandon this one, but I will come back to it at some point. This is adding to the Giant TBR numbers now because I didn't finish it. Without any further ado, let's look at the books I did read. So I read Heatwave by Victor Jestin is the first one. This is translated by Sam Taylor and it was originally in French. So this is the book I read for France in the World Cup Readathon. Yeah, this is a very, very short book, only 104 pages. This was kindly sent to me by Gemma from Gemma Books because when we met up in the summer, I kind of convinced Gemma to buy this because she was looking for translated fiction. So Gemma read this and then kindly sent it to me. And yeah, I am not sure about how I feel about this one. It would probably be my least favourite book of the month, but mainly because there wasn't a lot to it. It's a very sort of fever dreamy type book. It's very sort of stream of consciousness from the point of view of a teenage boy. And the weird thing about this teenage boy is he's at a holiday camp with his family, and one night, right at the very beginning, so on the first page and on the blurb, so not a spoiler, he witnesses the death of another boy, and rather than tell people about this, he deals with it in his own way, which takes up the rest of the 100 pages. This was decidedly weird. The decisions that Leonard makes are rather bizarre, even for a 17-year-old boy. I enjoyed the experience of this book while I was reading it, but yeah, I don't really feel an awful lot about this book either way. It was fine, but it didn't wow me. Next up, I'm going to talk about an audiobook, Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. I read this for the Killer Reads Thriller Month book club, which is hosted by AJ over at AJ Dunn Reads and Writes. AJ really loved this book and went on to read lots of Ottessa Moshfegh. So if you like Ottessa Moshfegh or you want to try and get into Ottessa Moshfegh, go and check out AJ's channel, go and check out their brilliant Reading Ottessa Moshfegh vlog. But I did not enjoy Eileen. I thought Eileen was probably one of my least favourite of the Killer Reads books we've read this year. Like, again, I didn't hate it, I just thought that there was a lot of unnecessary stuff in Eileen, and I believe this is Moshfegh's debut, and from what I've heard, things only descend further, but I felt like a lot of what was going on in Eileen was deliberately trying to be disgusting. And the other book that it most reminded me of that I've read this year was a book that gets me really cross every time I speak about it, which is The Life of the Mind by Christine Smallwood, which I attempted to read because it was on Time Magazine's top 10 books of last year, and I thought it was awful and I DNF'd it halfway through. But yeah, Eileen reminds me a little bit of this book because it's very much sort of trying to be disgusting. Eileen is sort of a lonely woman in her early 20s, I think, at the time of the book, although she is clearly looking back in her old age and telling this story from the narrative. It's first person perspective, which I normally like, but unfortunately I didn't really like Eileen, so I found it quite difficult to like the book. And the main reason I found it quite difficult to like the book was because this had been billed to me as a thriller. This was not a thriller until maybe the last maybe half an hour. I waited and waited and waited in this audiobook for there to be some kind of big twist, something that would make this a thriller, and the last sort of maybe hour to half an hour is thriller-ish in terms of the events that happen, but it didn't make up for the utterly dragging rest of the book for me, unfortunately. I think this book is the sort of book that definitely divides opinion. I think I will try other books by Moshfegh, but I won't go into them thinking they are thrillers, and I definitely won't be reading the most recent one because I don't like the fact it's got a dead animal on the front. That was a bit of a sidetrack. The next book that I will talk about is Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. I read this as my Argentinian book for the World Cup. Again, this is a book that's fine. I got enjoyment out of it while I was reading it. Felt like it was similar to Heatwave in that they're both very short. They're both kind of fever dreamy in the way that they are told. But this one I enjoyed more because I found it very unusual, and I don't think I can really speak too much about it without spoiling it. It's about a woman who lies dying in hospital. I think it's in hospital, and she is telling her story to a little boy sitting by her bed who is not her own child, and the rest of it is really too confusing and too fever dreamy to say too much about. But I would say if you are looking for a short read, this is a really intriguing short read with a lot of sort of crazy stuff in it. So I really enjoyed the writing style. I would definitely read more by Samantha Schweblin. Yeah, it probably wasn't long enough for it to be more of a favourite in December. Next up, I'm going to talk about The Art of Murder. Finally, a book that was off the Giant TBR. And The Art of Murder has been on my Giant TBR for absolutely ages. I will be able to take it out of my TBR tin. It's been on there that long. I was pretty disappointed with The Art of Murder, to be honest. It's had two timelines, one dealing with a potential Jack the Ripper sort of character back in the 1880s in London, sort of telling the story as though they are Jack the Ripper, which very possibly, I mean, a lot of people were speculated to have been suspects, but it was never solved. So that was an interesting storyline. And the 21st century storyline featured Detective Chief Inspector Pendragon. I believe he has been in other books, but I'm not sure whether I will look out for them or not, because this book was kind of only really okay for me. Good enough in places. It kept me reading. It was an enjoyable enough sort of crime book, but it wasn't spectacular. Yeah, in the modern day storyline, people are being murdered and their bodies set up like sort of surrealist artworks, and so it was pretty gory and gruesome. To be honest, I am struggling to remember how this ended up, and I only sort of finished this mid-December. I believe I kind of solved this one before the end, or I definitely had an idea who had done it, and I think I turned out to be right, but I actually can't remember now, so that was obviously quite forgettable. So that was that one. Next, another audiobook. I listened to The Safe House by Nikki French. This was a good early Nikki French book, but quite different from a lot of their later work. But also, the interesting thing about their earlier work, you can kind of see themes that they take hold of and explore in more detail in the later books. This is a standalone about a doctor who moves out to the countryside. She's a doctor sort of specialising in trauma and how that manifests in people, and while she is out in the countryside, she is asked to sort of take into her home a victim of a major crime, and she does so and basically tries to help this girl, but yeah, things sort of spiral from there. I did enjoy this one. It ended possibly a bit too openly for a lot of people's likings, I would say, but I enjoyed the way it went, and it was an enjoyable listen. Yeah, I thought it was a good book. Next up, I think I'm going to talk about this one, because this was probably a book that I was a little bit disappointed by, and that was Murder in the Cricket House by Soji Shimada. I failed to mention that I was reading a lot of these books for Cloak and Dagger Christmas, but I read this one for the 3 French Hens prompt. Murder in the Cricket House by Soji Shimada. I was reading this for a lot of December, so I started this quite soon after the end of Christie's Missing, and I didn't finish this until after Christmas, and it was a real shame because I found it very, very slow moving, and when the actual solution to the mystery was revealed, I felt a little bit cheated by it. Like, these books, these Honkaku books, are supposed to give you all of the clues and you should be able to solve them, and that's fine, that's fair enough. Not being able to solve it is my own problem. I don't think I looked hard enough for the clues for this, but I felt like it was a bit of a silly solution to the mystery, to be honest, because there were several locked room mysteries in this, and the mysteries were a bit too impenetrable, and when the solution was revealed, I just, yeah, not like, this wasn't a bad book. It definitely wasn't a bad mystery. It was good, it was well written, it was well translated, but it wasn't a favourite for me, unfortunately, which was a shame because I was looking forward to this one a huge amount. Perhaps that's why it was actually disappointing. Next up, I've already mentioned this one in my previous wrap-up, but Unfinished Portrait by Mary Westmacott, which is the pseudonym of Agatha Christie. This is a very much autobiographical book by Agatha Christie, well, autobiographical fiction. is so closely similar to her actual autobiography that I at times felt like I was reading the same book with a different character name. But for me, the end part of this, which kind of shed light on things that Christie doesn't talk about in her autobiography, whether that was fictional or not, I did enjoy that, and I did enjoy sort of piecing together for myself some of Agatha Christie's life through reading this fiction. So this was a pleasant read, but I was a little bit bored in places, only because I have read the autobiography quite recently. Daisy Darker is another book that I've spoken about in my previous wrap-up, and this was another audiobook, and this was a thriller by Alice Feeney. I enjoyed this because it was a homage to And Then There Were None, and I enjoyed all the references to Agatha Christie. I did think that the plot itself was not the most believable, and I didn't particularly engage that much with the writing style, but I'm hoping that Alice Feeney's other books might have different writing styles, because this was very much a first-person narrative from Daisy's point of view, and I did appreciate the twists in this book. Next, a book that I got for Christmas and read immediately is After Dead by Charlaine Harris. I mentioned this book in my Christmas haul, and it basically has one page per character, wraps up what happens to each of the characters after the Sookie Stackhouse series, and I had a really enjoyable part of a day with this. It doesn't take very long to read, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who sort of wants some closure from the Sookie Stackhouse series by Charlaine Harris. I wouldn't really recommend that anyone read this who hasn't read the Sookie Stackhouse series, because it will not make any sense. This book was an enjoyable read, and I'm glad I've completed the entire series, including this book. I also read volume 2 of Paper Girls by, I think it's Brian K. Vaughan. This is a graphic novel about some girls, and I can't really say what happens in this book without spoiling volume 1, but the reason why I decided to read this series of graphic novels is because I read on somebody's Instagram that this was like Stranger Things but with girls, and it kind of is a bit, although I've only watched series 1 of Stranger Things, so I could be wrong. The first one followed 4 paper girls on their paper round in the 80s, and some really weird stuff starts to happen. These books do involve sort of aliens, time travel, that sort of thing. Really enjoyed volume 2. I've also already mentioned Strong Poison by Dorothy L. Sayers. I read this early in the month with Jessica, and I really enjoyed this. This was my favourite Lord Peter Wimsey mystery so far. I've also already wrapped up The Mousetrap and Selected Plays by Agatha Christie. I'd seen 2 of these plays in real life, and they're definitely more enjoyable on the stage than they are to read, but it was fun to read them and be able to picture what was going on in them. It was also quite fun to read 2 of Agatha Christie's plays where she adapted her books but removed Poirot, so I quite enjoyed The Hollow and Appointment with Death as well. Overall, this was a good read, but I'm quite sad that I'm coming to the end of new and original books by Christie. This was one of the last ones that I had to read. Next, The Buried Giant. I think I might have wrapped this up in the first half of the month as well. The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read this with Foxed Folios, and it was a great buddy read. This is a really different book by Kazuo Ishiguro. So this is a book about an older couple who kind of go on a quest to find their son's village, and other things happen along the way, and they meet other interesting characters. And I really enjoyed this because it was set in a really unusual time frame, sort of after King Arthur and that sort of mythological time period, and sort of in ancient Britain. This is supposed to be after the Romans have departed and Britain is declining into ruin. I really enjoyed this. It kind of had a sort of dystopian feel to it, but also a bit of a historical feel to it, and also a really fantasy feel to it. It's really different to anything else I've read this year, and I really enjoyed reading The Buried Giants. Another one I really enjoyed unexpectedly was the audiobook of The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. I haven't read a Beth O'Leary book before, and I don't usually read sort of romantic comedies, but at some point in the month I saw an advert for the TV series of The Flatshare. And I thought, oh, that's a book. I wonder if that book's any good. I have to be in the mood for it, but I really do enjoy a romantic comedy. But I don't really enjoy reading romance books. So why is that? And then I thought maybe it's because I have tried romances. I don't really try sort of contemporary romantic comedy type books. Maybe this is one of those. So I tried The Flat Chair, I wasn't disappointed. Fantastic audiobook, really enjoyed the sort of romantic comedy elements within it. And this is the story basically of two people who are living together without actually ever living together. So they share a flat and they share a bed, but one of them, the man, is on night shift, so he lives in the flat during the day and Tiffy lives in the flat at night. This was, of course, a romantic comedy, so they did eventually meet, but I really enjoyed the way this book went about what it did, and it was a pleasant, light read that kind of really kick-started my reading when I felt a little bit stuck. So definitely this was a month where I was enjoying audiobooks more than physical books, which only happens very rarely. And this was an audiobook that I really, really did enjoy. So I've only got 2 more books left to wrap up, and they are totally and completely different from each other. One is Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I counted this as a book from a collected works because I have this in the collected works of Shakespeare, but my mum either gave or lent me this copy to make it easier than reading the giant volume. And I started this in September, shamefully only finished it at the end of December, but I really enjoyed the day that I spent sitting down with Hamlet in December and actually fully appreciating the plot and finally finishing it. I would say that these are probably my 2 favourites of the month, but Hamlet because I feel pleased with myself for finishing it and for reading more Shakespeare, because I do really enjoy reading Shakespeare when I'm doing it, but it's not something I ever think to pick up. And Hamlet is definitely one of the plays that I've meant to read for the longest time. It has so much interesting language in this, so many things that I sort of recognise from everyday life. I think Hamlet has a bit of everything, and I really, really did enjoy reading this one. But I also really enjoyed this library book, Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori. I really enjoyed this. I read this on the last day of December because I saw on Jack Spreadbookjoy's channel that this was an enjoyable book that you could read in a day, and that turned out to be true. This is about Keiko, who doesn't fit in, and she's 36 years old, working in a convenience store, and she's been working in the convenience store since she was 18, and people do not understand why she doesn't want to behave normally and get a real job, get a husband, and so on. And this is kind of about what happens when she tries to be more normal, and I absolutely loved this. I thought it was a really funny, really interesting little book, and it won't take you very long to read at all. It was great. Recommend these 2 for very different reasons. Obviously this is an absolute classic for a reason, and this is just fun. I really enjoyed this one. So these 2 are my favourites of the month if I had a favourite, but I must say that this month there were no 5-star books and I didn't really pick anything out as a top favourite. So in terms of Cloak and Dagger Christmas, which I was meant to be joining in with, I did complete a lot of the non-bookish prompts, but I think there was 1 or 2 that I missed. I didn't manage to do the alliterative title prompt, so I think I fell short of Sherlock Holmes level this year, but I did complete some of the prompts, so I'm glad I joined in again, and I think I reached police inspector level. Yeah, thank you again to the hosts of Cloak and Dagger Christmas for running that, because it was really fun, and I really enjoyed Christie's Missing Readathon again this year, so thank you to those that hosted that one as well. I'll link everybody's details down below so you can check them out. And finally we come to the final giant bookshelf numbers of 2022. We ended November on 169 books. It was the lowest the TBR has been for years, but of course it was also Christmas. So the last video that you will have seen was my book haul. I bought 2 books in early December, I bought 1 book after Christmas in late December, and I was given 6 books that I'm adding to the giant TBR at Christmas. So that was a total of 9 books, and adding those on makes 178 books on the giant TBR. In the interests of being absolutely spot on how many we do have on the giant TBR, I did also want to add this book that was sent to me for the Immune read along, and that is Immune by Philipp Dettmer. I will be reading this in January, but obviously in the meantime it will be on the giant TBR, So that is added, which brings us to 179 books. As I've said, I'm going to add The Floating Admiral by the Detection Club is going to add on to there because I didn't finish it. It should be on the TBR. And I also need to add, I hauled this back in November. My mum bought it for me. I feel it's only honest to actually add it to the giant TBR because although I will likely give it back to my mum afterwards, I am going to take this onto the giant TBR so that we start the year knowing the exact number that I have. That adds 2 more on, which brings us up to 181. Of those 181, I read 5 books in the month of December from the giant TBR. Those were The Art of Murder, Unfinished Portrait, Murder in the Crooked House, Strong Poison, and The Mousetrap and Selected Plays. Taking away those 5, that leaves us with 176 books as my giant TBR number for the start of 2023. Editing Alice here very quickly. Despite my best efforts of adding up, it's not my strong point, and I managed to still leave off one of the books that was supposed to add to the giant TBR, which was The Marriage Portrait. Somehow I've left it off, so my number to start the year on is actually 177 books. Fingers crossed this is going to be a better year for reducing the giant TBR than last year. Last year we started at 192 and we reached 176 because of all the book hauling and because of all the library books that I read. So hopefully my 30 book challenge in 2023 is going to help me really read the books on my shelves or admit to myself that I don't want them and unhaul them. While we're on being completely honest, I did buy one more book in between Christmas and New Year, but I'm not going to show you it and it's not going to add to the giant TBR. The only clue I'm going to give you at the moment is that it is more of a puzzle than a book. So there will be a video devoted to this book very shortly, so stay tuned for that one. It's a bit of a mystery. So that brings us to the end of my December wrap up, the end of the giant TBR numbers for 2022, and let's hope that 2023 is an even better year for reading. Do let me know in the comments down below, what have you been reading? What was your favourite book in December? I'd love to hear from you. Do chat all things bookish with me in the comments down below. If you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll hope very much to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Thanks for watching and bye for now.